Assalamu alaikum to all of my students. Hope you all are fine. Today I am going to take another unit that starts with cost. 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 What we call cost. And we discussed law of variable proportion, where we utilize different types of inputs in order to produce a given level of outputs. Today we have to know what we call cost. First, I will write definition of cost. What we call cost. Cost refers to cost refers to cost refers to expenditure incurred by an incurred by producer on factor and non-factor inputs for a given amount of output in order to produce given amount of output. What we call factor inputs? All right, factor inputs. Factor inputs. What we call factor inputs? Factor inputs like land, labor, capital, and entrepreneur. These are the factor inputs. Non-factor inputs. Non-factor inputs. That is raw material. Raw material. Used for manufacturing goods and service. Goods and service. What we call cost. Cost means expenditure incurred by the producer. Yes, on factor and non-factor inputs. For example, on land, labor, for example, wages, capital, rent. Yes, rent on labor wages means this we call cost, as it is incurred by the producer, as he has to produce different goods and services. That we call cost. Cost means expenditure. What you have to remember, cost means expenditure incurred by the producer in order to produce different goods and services. Generally, there are two types of costs. First, explicit cost. Explicit cost. Yes, as I tell you, producer has to produce different types of goods. Definitely explicit cost. Cost incurred by producer. Incurred by producer. Expenditure. Expenditure incurred by producer to purchase different inputs from marketplace from marketplace. Generally, producer is dealing with market. When he has purchased inputs from the market, for manufacturing and different goods and services. Definitely that we call explicit cost. For example, I will give example. Hiring of labor, labor, hiring of labor for for business. He had to pay wages. Yes, wages. Yeah, hiring of any, yes, company, company, hiring of any company. He has to pay rent to that company. Means wages they are considered as explicit cost. Rent that is considered as explicit cost, as these producers has to pay. For example, hiring labor for different for manufacturing different goods and services, running of machines, running a company, yeah, rent for hiring of any company, shops, industries. In order for that he has to pay rent, yearly rent, in order for running his business. Second one, implicit cost. Implicit cost. Implicit cost. This also expenditure incurred by the producer. All right. Expenditure. Expenditure incurred by producer on self-owned self-owned inputs. Self-owned input. For example, this thing is not too much difficult to understand. Generally, we are doing these things at our home. As producers, utilize family members for producing in agriculture fields. Own family members. Yeah, yes. Or producer is utilizing his own land for agriculture practices. That we call implicit cost. Expense incurred by, for example, yes, self-owned inputs. Hiring, hiring own family members for agriculture work. Or own land. Utilizing own land for agriculture purpose. That we call implicit cost. Expense incurred by the producer on self-owned inputs, like he will utilize his own family members, or he will utilize his own land for agriculture practices. That we call implicit cost. There are two more concepts of costs. Selling cost. Selling cost. What we call selling cost. Selling cost generally refers to selling selling cost refers to cost or expenditure incurred by the producer, incurred by producer producer to promote his sales by way of advertising, advertising. As he will to promote his sales, he used definite expenditure, large amount of money in order for the promote of his sales. As you are knowing, every day when we use Facebook, generally we use Facebook advertising. Every company, every shopkeeper, every industry tries to promote its sales by way of advertising. Last one concept, production cost. These are the few concepts. Definitely you should know these concepts so that it will be easy to continue this unit. Fourth one, this was as third, fourth one, production costs. Production cost. What we call production cost? The expenditure incurred by the producer. Expenditure incurred by producer. Incurred by producer on factor inputs. As I tell you, what we call factor input: land, labor, and capital. Land, labor, capital, and entrepreneur. Factor inputs for incurred by a producer on factor input: land, labor, capital, and entrepreneur. For factor inputs and non-factor inputs. Factor input, land, labor, and non-factor. Non-factor, as I tell you, raw material. Raw material. Non-factor for producing given level of output. For producing given level of output. Level of output. For producing given level of. These are the few concepts related to cost. Yes. Explicit cost, implicit cost, selling cost, production cost. These costs you should remember twice or thrice in order to make differentiate between these costs. And sometimes objective or 2 marks question is definitely difference between the implicit cost and explicit cost. You should know what we call explicit cost. An input is purchased by the producer from market. Implicit cost, expenditure incurred by the producer on self-owned inputs. This is important concept. Explicit cost as examination point of view. Difference between explicit cost and implicit cost. The rest you should avoid, but explicit cost, implicit cost, that's one of important. That can be based on 2 marks. Difference between explicit and implicit cost. I think it is enough. In next lecture, I will discuss what we call a fixed cost and variable cost. Till that time, you have to wait and watch. I will be returned back very soon. Hope for the best. Take care. Thanks. Have a nice day.